Right, hello.
No, I don't want to record.
So welcome everybody. I hope you are all having a lovely evening. I hope everyone who it's been a couple of months in between these webinars. Hope everyone's been having a lovely couple of months. So yeah, basically plan of attack as everyone's kind of joining in. We'll get into the webinar in a moment. But if you haven't met me before, my name is Rowan. I'm the hiking fitness expert who's kind of helps you out with some webinars and some trainings and all of that. So basically today's subject, we're talking about mental strength and mindset for hiking. So yeah, basically, as always, this is going to sort of run for 45 minutes on the dot, just because I don't want my wife getting too cranky at me for working too late on a weeknight. So I'm going to bang through everything that I have off my side of things, and then depending on how much time we have, we'll have a little bit of an open Q&A. Hopefully, we'll have about 10 minutes or so to kind of work through all of that. So with that being said, let me share my screen and we can get into it all. So hopefully everyone can kind of see this, see this all good. So yeah, basically today we are talking about mental strength and mindset for hiking, which is a massive thing, as I'm sure we all know. Now, if you haven't been to one of these presentations before, you don't actually know who I am. I just want to do a brief little intro of who I am. My name is Rowan Smith. I'm the founder of Summit Strength, which is an online personal training service which specializes in helping hikers, only hikers, get ready for their adventures. Now, essentially, the people we typically work with day to day is we help three real types of hikers. Number one, hikers who have a big trip. So typically, the people on these webinars with Camino Women, most of you probably fall into this category here in one way or another, where they have a big trip coming up. They're like, you know what, actually, I'm not 100% sure about my fitness for this. I want to make sure I'm in a great position where I can not only get through my trip, but also be in a position where I can, properly enjoy myself throughout. The second type of hiker we work with is hikers who do struggle with a bit of an ache or pain. So foot pain, knee pain, back pain, hip pain. These things are super common in the hiking world. So essentially we help a lot of hikers get on top of these things so they can kind of get out on their adventures feeling confident and comfortable. And we also work with a lot of hikers who may not have a big trip coming up, they may not have an ache or pain, but they're like, you know what, I like to get out, hiking something I enjoy, but I feel like my physical condition is holding me back. So we work with a lot of people like this as well. Now, for myself, I've been doing this for years and years and years now. I personally trained and prepared over 400 hikers for every type of trip imaginable, from, their first day hikes, first overnighters, multi-dayers, all the way up to literally going up to those 8,000 meter mountains in the more mountaineering side of things. So yeah, I've trained everyone in every situation imaginable. It's not just me these days through Summit Strength. We do have a bit of a team that works with us. But basically when it comes down to it, I've seen it all, helped everyone, and hopefully I'll be able to impart a little bit of some tips and some knowledge to help a lot of you here. So essentially what we're talking about today is mental strength and mindset for hiking, which is a massive topic. And by no means do I claim myself to be a mental strength or mindset specialist. There's people who have very deep knowledge in regards to this type of stuff. But what I'm going to be presenting today is some really simple tips that you don't have to be a specialist to know. You don't have to get too deep, too technical, but it can make a pretty big difference. So essentially why mental strength is important in the world of hiking, briefly cover this off, off the trail. So when we're talking about our kind of preparation, so you have a big trip coming up in 6 months time, 5 months time, 4 months time, whatever it may be, mental strength and mindset, big thing, because there's often, a lot of nerves associated with stepping into these big adventures, maybe some anxieties. You're like, you know what, actually, I've really struggled with this type of thing in the past, or maybe I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to deal with this, or whatever it may be. It's something that can be really tricky. Also, on top of that is when it comes down to the world of hiking, there are a lot of things that we cannot control. There's things like weather we can't control, how we respond to high altitude we can't control, how our gear is going to go to a degree, how, if we're going to get sick or whatever it may be. There's a lot of unknowns and a lot of question marks in the world of hiking, which can make things tricky. So essentially when we can focus on mental strength and mindset, we can really hone in on the things that we can control. And there are a number of things that sort of sometimes stress us out, sometimes cause anxieties, but you can actually control them a little bit, which can make those uncontrollable things just a little bit more bearable. Now, when we're actually on the trail, so we're out on our adventures, we're out on the trail having a good time, A few reasons why mental strength and mindset's important. Number one, deal with issues as they come up. So, if you have a gear malfunction, one of your boots break, or your hiking pole breaks, or whatever it may be, if you get a little bit sick, if you sort of, dealing with or whatever it may be, just dealing with issues in the moment can make a big, can really, really help. Also getting you out of a bit of a tricky spot, if you're sort of going along the trail and you're like, oh, you know what, actually I rolled my ankle. I stepped in a hole that was unexpected. I'm really, really, really a bit worried about this. We can fall back on some mental strength and mindset tips. We can often help with this. It can increase enjoyment. If we use a few tips, it can definitely increase the amount of fun, amount of pleasure we have out on the trail. It can literally conserve energy if we sort of throw a few of these tips in, because, when we are really, really hyped up, if we're anxious, if we're nervous, that can actually churn through energy and get us a little bit more tired, which is not amazing. And then also mindset can directly affect our performance. So how we can perform, how long we can hike for, how happily we can hike for, mindset can directly affect our physical performance. So when it comes down to all of this, there's a lot of different factors here, but it is really, really, really valuable. Now, basically what we're going to be covering today, as I said, we're not going to get in crazy deep or anything like that, but these are basically some simple techniques that anyone can use in, a lot of different situations. It doesn't take a huge amount of practice, doesn't take a huge amount of know-how, but can be very, very, very effective. Now, mental strength, I'll sort of preface with this all we're saying is mental strength training is like real training in the sense that it does need to be practiced. And the stuff I'm going to talk you through today, first time you do it, it may be difficult and it may not feel like it makes a big difference for you. But it's the type of thing where you can practice it, you can develop it, and you can master it, and it gets more and more and more and more effective. It's literally, you can think of it like a muscle. The first time you do a set of bicep curls, not going to do a huge amount for your arms. You do it again, a little bit more beneficial. Do it again, a little bit more beneficial, and over time, it can make a big difference. So we kind of want to treat mental strength, these techniques that I'm talking about in that sort of context. Treat it like real training, does need practice, but it can be really, really useful. Now, also the last thing I'll sort of say on this before we get into it is if you do obviously struggle with genuine anxieties, issues, mental blocks, some stuff that is a little bit more lifelong, a little bit more serious, a little bit more severe, or whatever it may be, then obviously seeking out a professional is always a good idea. Psychologist, psychiatrist, whatever falls into that, counselor, whatever it may be, that's always the next step. So, this is sort of talking about everyday stuff, but if is a little bit more deeper, a little bit stronger, definitely taking a further step on that can go, be a good idea. So what we're going to be covering, as I said before, we're going to be covering 3 really, really, really simple mental strength and mindset techniques, which can make a genuine difference both your training as well as your hiking. Now, these things, they may seem simple. They may be things you've heard in the past before, in one way, shape, or form or another. But I promise you, if you utilize them and practice them, they can be really, really, really different. And every single one of these, I've had countless hikers utilize every single one of these in a multitude of different situations, been really, really, really valuable. So with that being said, let's get into the first one and what I call the most important mental strength strategy. And this one kind of trumps absolutely everything else when it comes down to the world of hiking. So important. Now, one of the toughest things mentally when it comes down to these adventures is just that great unknown around what you're going to be facing. So things like snow, heat, rock scrambling, sleeping in a tent, just not really knowing what to expect, how your body, how your mind is going to come across these certain things, is a great unknown. It can often cause us a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, just really, really worry us week after week, month after month, leading into the trip. And really when it comes down to, overcoming these type of things, and these things that are stressing you out and worrying them, is the most powerful thing you can do. And it is common sense, but it does need to be said, is just to get some exposure to this type of thing. And before you actually go out on your adventure, getting some type of exposure to these unknowns, which you're a little bit worried about. So, for example, a lot of hikers sort of say, when they're going on a particular trip and say, let's use Kokoda as an example. This is a big one that a lot of Aussies do. And a lot of people are like, what, Kokoda, awesome trip, but I know there's going to be a lot of rivers I have to go back and forth on. And I've never really done that before. Or maybe I'm a little bit unsteady on my feet and it does worry me. Or maybe I've done that in the past and I really, really struggled. And this causes a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, a lot of people thinking about this over and over and over and over. So if you're in this situation, if you're worried about river crossings, then the simple answer to this and the simple thing that can help this is in your training, in your preparations, finding some time to expose yourself to it. find a short river which is nearby, which is accessible, which it's sort of something you can go out and do a day trip and just do a bit of practice, going back and forth on it, crossing it, get a little bit of exposure to it in a way that isn't in the middle of nowhere, in a way that isn't in halfway through Kokoda where you're like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, I'm exhausted, and I have to deal with this, but something that's a little bit more controllable. Or another example is, if you're worried about sleeping in a tent, this is a big one for a lot of people who've never done an overnighter, never had a big background in hiking, in camping, or whatever it may be, practicing it. I have lots of hikers that I've worked with in the past who, in their backyards, if they're lucky enough to have a big backyard, slept out in the tent a couple of times. And that's really settled them. Or people who are living in an apartment, they've literally put the tent in their living room and just practice putting it up, sleeping in the tent, using their gear, which may not be quite as intense or as quite as real as being out in the middle of nowhere, in the outback, dealing with animals and this and that. But it does give them a little bit of exposure, and it has helped. Or another thing like rock scrambling. If you're worried about, hey, I got a trip with lots of rocks coming up or whatever it may be, find somewhere you can practice it or whatever it may be. If you're scared about hiking in the dark, for a lot of people go to Kilimanjaro and, summit night is dark as anything. You're in the middle of the night and you're hiking, finding some time to practice a couple of night hikes. This obviously is kind of common sense, and a lot of people come to this logical conclusion, but the idea behind this is really, really honing in and saying, you know what, if this is causing you issues, you want to do it, and you want to make it happen. So the key to this type of thing is exposing yourself to these challenges in a way that you are still in control. In the sense of, as I was talking about those river crossings, some people may think, okay, you know what, I'm worried about a river crossing. Maybe I will go do this big hike. And in this big hike, I have 4 or 5 river crossings, and that'll sort me out. That'll give me practice and this and that. And that can be great. And if you can do that, fantastic. But a lot of people, they'll be like, you know what, that in itself causes a lot of stress and anxiety. So what I advocate for here is doing it in a way that you can control. So as opposed to going in the middle of nowhere for a big hike, just drive somewhere that has a little 2-kilometer walk to a river and practice going back and forth. So if something does go wrong, then you can bail out and be like, no, that wasn't for me. I'm out of here. I'm going to go back to my car or whatever it may be. Just a situation where you are still in control. Or with the hiking in the dark, the same thing. Don't go out for a hike where you're going into the middle of nowhere and you've got to worry about communications and this and that. But maybe find something a little bit more local. Maybe find something that's sort of, maybe a bush path, but it's still pretty in a local neighborhood where you can cruise around and you can still have bailout points or whatever it may be. So we want to kind of think about staying in control while exposing ourselves to these types of things. Now, you can kind of sort of look at this when we are looking at these things. You can incorporate this into, say, your normal training sessions. So say you're leading up to a hike and you're like, you know what, in my training, I'm going to plan to hike every second week or every third week. You could sort of look at saying, you know what, in these hikes, I'm going to seek out hikes which has some rock scrambling, that has some river crossings or whatever it may be. And that can be a good way of doing it. Or you can kind of do them as standalone sessions where you're like, you know what, actually today I'm just going to go practice on a river. Or today I'm going to go down the beach and climb over the rocks and have a bit of practice on that or whatever it is. Now, obviously there are things when it comes down to things that you may not be able to practice or replicate that are causing you stress and anxiety. For example, high altitude. In Australia, we can't really go out and expose ourselves to that. And that can cause a lot of stress. So here we really want to think about control what we can. What are the things that are stressing us out that we do have access to, and what can we control there? So those anxieties that may be on those uncontrollable things, they're a little bit more manageable because we're sort of chipped away at other things and giving ourselves a bit more space. So with that being said, here's a little bit of action plans. If you've got a pen and paper or whatever it may be, now's the time to pull it out and take down some notes. And this is kind of what I'd recommend off that sort of topic. Really, really simple, but how to go about it. Number one, you want to sit down and you will list out all the areas in your adventure which are going to cause you worry. All the things you're a little bit nervous about, a little bit stressed out about, a little bit anxious about, or whatever it may be. Just there's no wrong answer here. Just list and write down anything that may be in there. Now, from there, what you want to do is go through your list and separate them into things that are possible to practice. Then you're like, you know what, actually, I could go do this. I could go do this, or maybe this is reasonable. And which ones are just not accessible. So, if you're worried about snow, but obviously we're in Australia, that may not be accessible. That's fine. If you're worried about high altitude, that may not be accessible, whatever. But just separate that list into the things that you can practice and cannot practice. And then for all the ones which you can practice, we kind of want to just take some steps. And you want to list down how you're thinking about going to practice them. So you want to list down what you will do. So using that river crossing example and say, okay, I'm going to find a river. I'm going to spend 20 minutes going back and forth the river. That's what I'm going to do. Where you will do it, where is the river that I'm actually going to do? Get specific on this, because we don't want to be airing fairy. We want to do a bit of research, figure it out, and know where we're going to do it. What considerations do we need to make? If I'm going into a river and I'm like, you know what, actually, I've got to hike out a couple of kilometers, worst comes to worst, maybe I roll my ankle. How can I minimize the risk of something like that happening? Tell people where I'm going. Go out with a buddy. Make sure I'm using poles. What considerations do I need to make to all of this? And is this going to be a standalone session? Am I going to do this just on a Saturday? I'm going to go down, do half an hour of this and see you later. Or am I going to do it as part of the hike? List down the details and lift down the specifics, because the more specific you can get here, the more likely you're going to do it. And then finally, get out a calendar, pencil in a date and a time, and decide where you're going to practice these. Some people may have one thing they want to practice. Some people may have 4 or 5. Some people may have none. But it's such a simple exercise, but really, 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 really valuable. And this in itself, if you can chip away and control what you can and eliminate or get a little bit of control around these things that are stressing you out, the ones that you may not have control about, they get much, much, much easier to manage. So that's tip number 1. It's kind of common sense, but it's really, really, really important. Now, next one is the concept of knowing your why, which I'm sure everyone on this call has heard before in one way, shape, or another. It's a really, 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 big deal in the mental strength mindset space, really, and motivation space, I suppose. But today I'm going to talk you through a little bit of a process and how you can kind of get into all of this, which can be really, really effective. So essentially, if you haven't heard this before, I'm sure you have, but I'll say it again. If you haven't heard of this before, understanding the why, so the reason behind why you're doing a certain thing, and in this example, the hike that you're planning on, can play a massive, massive, massive role in helping motivation during both your training and also helping you go through tough spots on the trail. So ultimately, if you kind of know why I am doing, why I booked myself onto a trip for Kilimanjaro, and I wake up one morning, I planned a session to do, it's 5:30 in the morning at the gym. I wake up and I'm in the bed, it's raining, and I'm like, oh my gosh, my reasoning behind Kilimanjaro is I just want to do Kilimanjaro. That's not super motivating. You'll probably roll over, go to bed. You're like, well, I don't really care. Or if you actually know a little bit deeper and you're like, you know what? This trip is really, really important for me. It's really, really, valuable for me for X, Y, and Z. You may wake up in the morning, think about that, and be like, I'm going to get myself out of bed, get to the gym. It's that type of thing where it just sort of helps you with this motivation, as well as tough spots on the adventure when you're like, oh, something's gone wrong. I'm not having a good time. And think about this, get a little bit deeper, and that can often carry us through. So most of us, when it comes down to these type of things, if anything, any big undertaking we want to doing, most of us kind of have a surface level understanding of why we want to do something. But ultimately with this stuff, the deeper we can get, the more powerful it can become. And this is definitely worthwhile spending a little bit of time here. Now, this can sometimes be a little bit difficult to identify, but I'm going to talk you through what I call, well, not I call, someone's called, and I can't remember who it is, the 3 whys technique, which is a really, really great way of kind of getting a little bit deeper on this and can go a big, can be really, really valuable. Now, to give you a little bit of context on this and sort of talk you through sort of how valuable this is and how powerful this is, I want to give my sort of personal example here, just to give you a little bit of context and how this has helped me personally. Now, last year, I booked myself into a big sort of event, a big change for me. Wasn't hiking related, but it was a big fitness event, big challenge. I was like, you know what? My fitness isn't amazing right now. My health isn't amazing right now. I'm really, really focused on business, yada, yada, yada. I need something to do. So I booked myself on a big, big, big event. And as I was going through this, I was like, this is a massive undertaking for me. Going to take a lot of physical, mental grit, a lot of preparations, yada, 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 yada. I was like, you know what? I'm going to do what I tell my coaches, what I tell my hikers. I'm going to go through this process. I'm going to understand my why. Why am I doing this? Because it's going to be so much effort. I need every single ounce of motivation I can get. So the first time I sort of looked at this, I was like, why am I doing this particular event? It's really, really physically demanding, really, really challenging. First thing I came up with, I was like, you know what? I'm just out of shape and I want something new and exciting to focus on. I was a bit bored with my training, a bit bored with my exercise. It led to me being really, really out of shape. And I was like, I just want something new. Now, if I woke up at 5 a.m. in the morning and it was raining and I was like, hey, I need to get out and train or I'm not going to be ready. And I sort of thought, okay, why am I doing this? And I thought about this. I'm out of shape and I just want something new and exciting. It might help, but not super powerful. Now, from there, what we want to do is we look at this and we're like, that's a reason, but it's kind of surface level. We kind of want to get a little bit deeper. So the simple thing from here is with this 3 whys technique is I've asked myself why I want to do this event. Now from here, I want to ask myself why again. And I want to say, okay, I'm out of shape and want to do something new and exciting to focus on. Why is that important to me? How do I get a little bit deeper? Why is this thing important to me? And I sat down, I thought about it, and it took a little while. But what I came out with, I was like, you know what? In all honesty, at that stage of my life, I wasn't super confident in my body's physical performance. Like I'd started dealing with a lot of injuries in the past. I'd done a lot of things. I'd gotten niggles and this and that. And I kind of lost confidence in the body, lost confidence in my body's ability to just go out and do cool things. And I ultimately wanted to prove to myself through this big event that I booked myself that I could kind of still give it some serious challenge and I could still do cool things. So you look at that and you're like, that is quite a bit deeper. And then you look at that and you're like, okay, 5 a.m. in the morning, it's raining, I'm tired, I don't want to get out of bed. If I ask myself, why am I doing this? Why am I getting out of bed? Why do I want to be ready for this event? That's actually a little bit more powerful. And you're like, you know what, actually, yeah, that makes sense. You know, my body's been letting me down. I'm doing this so I can prove myself I can still do cool things. That's pretty good. But we can get a little bit deeper. So we're going to the third one and we sort of say, okay, I've come up with that. Why is that important to me? And this one can sometimes take a little while to kind of figure out, sometimes take a little while to get to. But if you can, really, really, really valuable. And essentially after a little bit of thought, I was like, you know what? This is what I came up with. I was like, you know what? This is important to me because I was worried that if I kept on this particular track, you know, I was going to spend the rest of my life limiting myself in regards to things I wanted to do, which would affect me personally, being able to go out and do cool things, good adventures, jump into random sports or whatever it may be. Affect my family. If I, you know, eventually, you know, when I have kids, going out and running around with kids, jumping off rocks and all of that, that was literally the road that I was like a little bit worried about. And you can kind of see that compared to the first one, way more powerful. And for me, you know, when I was having tough times and the training, the process and this and that, I could fall back on that. I was like, you know what? That's really personal. That's really, really, you know, deep. But for me, it got me through a lot of tough times because I'd identified that. I knew why it was important and it really, really helped me string together. So you can kind of see if we can get a little bit deeper with this type of thing, spend a little bit of time on it, you can get super, super powerful with it. So now it's time to get your pen and paper out again. I'm going to talk you through, you know, the process of this. It's pretty straightforward. Get out a pen and paper, and ideally we do want to do this in a place that you're not going to get disturbed. It's not just like 5 minutes, you know, where you go on your lunch break, but somewhere where you can put aside like, you know, 10, 15 minutes, maybe half an hour, just somewhere you're not going to be disturbed. And ideally we want to do this with a pen and paper so you have that visceral feel of literally writing down. Now, first of all, ask yourself, for whatever trip you got coming up, ask yourself, why am I doing this adventure? Just ask yourself that, whatever comes to mind, write it down. Now, this doesn't have to be deep, this first one, but whatever it is, write it down. Let that digest. Look at whatever answer you put together, and then ask yourself, why is that answer important to you? This may take a little while to figure out. So sit down, don't get distracted, take a little bit of time, figure it out. Write down whatever it may be. Then, once you've got that, ask yourself again, look at the second answer and say, why is that important to me? This third one, it can take a little bit of while to figure it out. But if you're patient with it, if you sort of, you know, use, you know, that introspection, really, really, really practice it, it can come up with something really, 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 really powerful. Now, this will take a little while for you. You know, you may be lucky enough to get that all out in one setting. As I said before, this thing is like, you don't need to treat it like more practice helps. For me, through various stages of my life, I've done this exercise and it's gotten easier and easier and easier over the time. So it may take a little while for you to figure it out. It may not all happen in one sitting. You may only get the first surface level and you may rack your brains like, I can't come up with anything deeper. But whatever you get it, and then go back to it again, and then go back to it again, go back to it again, and just practice it and see what you come up with. And you know, there's maybe some stage where you just have a light bulb moment. You're like, oh, that's it, and whatever it is, and it's really, really valuable. Now, when you do have your answers, whether it's that first one, second one, you get all the way down to the third one, write them down, and then ideally you want to put them up in locations which you will see regularly. Now, this can sometimes be a little bit tricky because obviously it can get, as you saw in my thing, that was really personal. That was something really deep to me. And sometimes it can be tough to write down these pretty personal things and just have them up in the house or whatever it may be. So maybe you might not be able to have it everywhere, but wherever you can. You know, what I recommend, have it in the bathroom mirror, where, you know, brushing your teeth, you'll see it. Have it on the fridge if you can. For me, when I'm in my office, you can't really see it, but I've got a whiteboard in front of me, which has my current wires written down. I've got a whiteboard behind me, which has, you know, a little bit more detail, which I see every time I walk in. I have it on my phone, this and that, just anywhere you're going to see. So everywhere you go, you kind of get bombarded with this because it can just be so useful. So when you're having a rough time, you're like, oh my gosh, the last thing in the world I want to do is train today. You look at it and you're like, oh, cool, that's awesome. Or alternatively, as we get into the hiking, before you actually go out on your hike, so before you go on your adventure, write this in a note and keep it in your pocket. So whatever hiking pants you're planning on wearing or whatever it is, keep it in your pocket or keep it in your hip belt on your pack, and have it handy. And you can look at it at the start of the day, look at it at the end of the day. You can sort of, if you're going through a tough spot, you can look at it. For me, I write this on a hike, but I don't actually look at it at all. But it's just purely the act of having my hand in my pocket. I feel that paper in my pocket. I'm like, that gives me a little reminder. Actually, I'm going up this hill. It's taking 2 hours. It sucks. I kind of want to stop. I'm not having a good time. And I'm like, oh, you know what? I have reasons why I'm doing this. It really, really helps. So, as I sort of said, this may take a little while to identify, but really, really do keep at it. Again, I'm sure you've heard of this concept before, and I'm sure, the one before, it was kind of common sense, but it's the type of thing where you can put into action, put it into place. It really, really will make a difference. So I strongly encourage you to do this. Also, I forgot to mention before, and I will sort of say it as we're going through, when we do the Q&A section, is if anyone does have any questions, just pop it into the chat, and I'll kind of just work through them one by one in order. So if you do have any questions that pop up as we're going through, pop it in the chat, and I will hopefully get to them. What are we on for time? Right on time, so we should all be good. So next one, I want to zip through this so we have a bit of time for questions. Positive self-talk. So this is another one you may have heard before, but really, 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 really valuable. Now, self-talk is essentially the internal narrative that we have about ourselves. There's just those internal thoughts that we sort of have, and it can have a tremendous impact in how you perform both with your training and when you're actually hiking. Now, many of us fall into the trap, and I would sort of say not just many, but most of us fall into the trap of negative self-talk at certain stages where we're like, you know what, we're out, doing a training session and we're not having a good time, and we're like, just start thinking in my head, I'm not fit enough for this. Or we're out on the trail, we're out with a group, and they're a little bit quicker than us, and we start saying, oh, you know what, I'm just too slow. I suck. I'm just really, really slow. I'm holding everyone up. Or maybe you got a pack on the back, and your first time you want to pack, and you're going up a hill, and you're like, oh, I'm just not strong enough for this. I'm hopeless, or I'm too old to be doing this, or whatever it may be. We all do it. We're all our own worst enemies. But this type of thing can get in the way of things. The tricky thing with this type of negative self-talk, as much as we all do it, it can directly affect our physical performance. So the mental thoughts going through our head can directly affect how we're actually getting along on the trail or with our training sessions. So here's a little example of this, and I strongly encourage you to give this a go at some stage. It's not much fun, but it really cements this concept home. Now, sometime this week, what I'd like you to do is find a nice long set of stairs or a long hill. Could be just going up the stairs in an apartment block, could be going up a hill, wherever it may be. Find something that'll take a couple of minutes to walk, if you can. Now, essentially, you're going to do 2 climbs. First time you climb up these stairs, you're going to climb up and you're going to walk whatever pace you want. And internally in your head, you just want to keep on saying, I am a heavy, slow slug. And you walk up and I'm a heavy, slow slug. I'm a heavy, slow slug. I'm a heavy, slow slug. You will notice that sucks. You will notice you go up that hill and you're like, oh my gosh, my legs are so heavy. Oh my gosh, that was an ordeal. Oh my gosh, that was just not enjoyable. Not much fun at all. Then essentially you want to go down to the bottom and you want to do the climb again. Exactly the same climb, but this time in your head, you say, I'm strong, I'm fit, I'm light. Nothing has changed except what you've been saying in your head, but you will notice a significant difference. And it's crazy just when you do it and when you practice it, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. But if you do it, you get that visceral feeling, you're like, oh my gosh, that's like night and day. And it's such a strong thing. And essentially, as it applies into the trail, really, 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 really valuable to be aware of this. So essentially, when it comes down to our hiking and also our training, we want to do 2 things. We want to minimize negative self-talk. We want to maximize positive self-talk. Pretty straightforward. Now, a few strategies for this. Number 1 is this can be tricky at first. And as I said, this type of training, it does take practice. You want to treat it like a muscle. At first, it's going to be tricky. At first, it's not going to be super effective, but if you practice it, be diligent with it, it gets more powerful, more powerful, more powerful, and eventually it gets really powerful. Now, essentially, the first strategy is when you catch yourself going negative, essentially, you want to stop, take a moment, realize you've gotten a little bit negative in your head, and you want to just take a moment, just try to reframe this in a positive way. So, for example, there may become a little bit of a mantra on the hike, and you're like, oh, you know what, my leg, I'm just so tired, I'm just looking for a break, or whatever it may be. If you catch yourself saying that, take a second, just acknowledge, like, oh, you know what, I caught myself saying that. And just what you want to do is just reframe whatever you said in a positive way. So in this example, I'm so tired turns into, I love pushing my body like this. It's a positive way of saying, you know what, I'm getting tired, but I actually really enjoy this, or whatever it is. everyone will be a little bit different, but kind of get the example. Or my legs are weak turns into, you know what, my legs can handle this. It's a struggle. Yes, I acknowledge it's a struggle. My legs can handle this. It's fine. Or I just don't have the energy today. Turns into, this will help improve my energy today because I'm really, really flat. I'm going to do this. And actually, this is going to help me. It's a struggle now, but it is going to help me. They're just sort of little things there, but you can kind of see, you take the negative, turn into a bit of a positive. As I said, first time you do this, well, initially when you do this, you'll probably catch 1 in 20 negative thoughts. We have negative thoughts all the time, and you won't catch them all the time. And you'll probably catch 1 in 20 or whatever it may be. But if you take the time, you acknowledge that, and you're like, oh, you know what, I'm going to take the time to reframe it, say it in my head internally, that'll get a little bit easier. Then we'll catch 1 in 15, and we'll catch 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 5, and eventually gets more and more and more and more. So we can sort of stop ourselves falling into that negative self-talk on the trail or with our training, catch it early, and have that positive effect. Now, for myself, there have been various stages through my life where I've been like, oh, you know what, I've realized for weeks and weeks and weeks, or months and months and months, I've been repeating these negative mantras in my head about certain things, about certain exercise, about certain things in my life. And I've eventually caught myself like, oh my gosh, this is having such an effect. And I took the time, and it was really, really hard, but I reframed. And eventually it turned into more of a natural thing where I was just being a little bit more positive. It can be such a powerful thing. So that's what I strongly recommend you. If you can, to make this a little bit more powerful, no one ever does it, but I will say you can make this more powerful by saying the reframe out loud. And you can stop on the trail, acknowledge it, say it out loud. Obviously, you look a little bit crazy talking to yourself or whatever it may be. You may not want to, really want to do it, but at least say the words in your head, and not just like, oh, I'm going to positively reframe that, but say those literal words in your head. Have that voice saying it. Can take a step. Now, the next one is positive affirmations, and again, you would have heard of this before. It's a little thing, but it can make a big difference. So essentially, sitting down and coming up with a positive affirmation handy, which you can rely on when things get a little bit negative. So a positive affirmation is simply a simple positive statement that you can repeat to yourself, which is meaningful for you. So essentially, we kind of want to come up with a really simple positive statement we can use when things get tough. It needs to be personal to you. So don't just pull something off Instagram or whatever it may be, like, oh, that's nice, but something that's kind of resonates with you. Now, for me, what I have with all my hikes, and I use this on my hikes, I use this when I'm not having a good time. My positive affirmation is like, I catch myself in the head and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm tired. Oh my gosh, this is a struggle, or whatever it may be. And I say to myself, literally, my legs are strong. I am strong. I've got this. And I'll say this again and again and again and again. I used this on Kokoda when I was sick of it. I was having a terrible time. Not a terrible time, but I was just like so over climbing up in the mud. And I said this over and over for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and it kind of got me through. So essentially just coming up with a really simple positive statement. It could be anything. It could be just like, you know what, I've got this, or I'm Wonder Woman, or I'm like, I'm the best, or my legs are like, like strong as the world, or whatever it is. It can be corny, it can be whatever. You're not going to tell anyone this, but come up with something simple. Write it down, and then again, write it on your pocket, write it on a piece of paper, have it in your pocket. You may not look at the piece of paper, but that act of writing it down can make a bit of a difference. And essentially what we want to do is, if you